He pulled the trigger before she could finish the sentence. Not a warning shot. Not a threat. The bullet tore through the shoulder of the man kneeling beside Serena Vale, and Silas Viscari didn't even watch him fall. He was already turning away, already checking his watch, already bored with the consequence of what he'd just done. That was the thing about Silas. The violence never registered on his face. It was simply maintenance, a correction, the way a man might swat a fly and reach for his coffee without missing a beat. Serena pressed her hands against the wound, blood soaking through her fingers, and looked up at the man who had destroyed her life long before she understood he was the one doing it. "You were always going to end up here," Silas said. "I just had to be patient." If you've ever trusted someone completely, given them every piece of yourself, and discovered too late that they were the architect of every disaster you survived, then you already know exactly how Serena Vale felt in that moment. Not rage, not even fear. Something quieter and far more devastating. The recognition that the danger was never what you thought it was, and never where you were looking. This story is about what happens after that recognition. What a woman does when she finally sees the full shape of the trap. And what a man does when he realizes the 12 years he spent searching for someone were the very thing keeping her alive. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and stay with me to the very end, because this one is going to take you somewhere you don't expect. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it started. The night Serena Vale ran, it was raining so hard she couldn't see the road. She didn't have a plan. She had a coat she'd grabbed off a hook by the door, $43 in cash, and a phone she'd already pulled the battery from because she'd seen enough of how the Viscari organization operated to know that a signal was the same as a bullet. You just didn't feel it coming. She was 24 years old, she was 8 weeks pregnant, and she had just watched 3 men get executed in the basement of a building she should never have been inside. 2 hours earlier, she had been in the Viscari estate's east wing looking for Damien. They'd fought that morning. Nothing catastrophic, just the low grinding friction of 2 people who wanted different versions of the same future. Serena was finishing her 2nd year of medical school. She'd been accepted to a hospital residency program that would take her out of New York for 18 months. Damien had gone quiet in the way that meant he was not actually quiet at all. She wanted to find him before dinner. She wanted to finish the conversation properly. She had taken a wrong turn through the wine cellar and come out through a door she'd never noticed before, and there was the basement, and there was the blood, and there was Damien standing in the middle of it. That was what she saw. Damien, standing, 3 men on the floor, a gun still lifted in the hand of one of the men flanking him. She didn't wait to understand it. She didn't wait for anything. Her body made the decision before her mind could intervene, and she moved back through the door the way she'd come, silent, shaking, her hand pressed over her mouth so hard her teeth cut into her lip. She told herself she had seen clearly. She told herself she knew what she had witnessed. She was wrong on both counts, but she wouldn't know that for 12 years. The flight to Portland was the last one out of JFK that night. She bought the ticket with cash from a woman at the counter who looked at Serena's soaked coat and didn't ask a single question. Serena sat in the last row with her knees pulled to her chest and didn't sleep and didn't cry. Crying felt like something that came after surviving, and she didn't know yet if she was going to survive. She had a friend from her undergraduate years, Marisol, who had married a man from a coastal Oregon town called Kettridge Bay and never come back. They had exchanged Christmas cards for 3 years after graduation. Marisol had always said the invitation was open. Serena got off the plane in Portland, bought a prepaid phone with the last of her cash, and called that number. Marisol answered on the 2nd ring. "I need help," Serena said. "I can't tell you everything, but I need a place to stay and I need to disappear. Can you do that?" A pause. Long enough that Serena had time to regret calling. Then Marisol said, "You still take your coffee black?" Dad. Kettridge Bay was this kind of town that didn't advertise itself. No tourism board, no scenic overlook signs pointing the way. The main street had a hardware store, a diner, a pharmacy, and an insurance office with a hand-painted window display that hadn't been updated since 2003. The Pacific pressed up against the rocks at the town's western edge, and the wind came off the water in the kind of cold that wasn't dramatic, just constant and indifferent, like the town itself. Serena became someone else there. Not all at once. Identity isn't shed like a coat. It goes in pieces. The way you stop jumping at car doors slamming outside, the way you stop scanning every restaurant for exits the moment you walk in, the way a new name stops sounding false in your mouth when someone calls it. She became Claire Moran. She got a job at the small medical clinic on the edge of town doing administrative work, then intake assessments. Then, after she finished the licensing credentials she'd transferred and rebuilt under the new name. She was seeing patients 3 days a week. She was good at the work. She had always been good at it. She was not good at the other parts of her life, the parts that involved being a person who trusted things, or planned beyond the next 6 months, or let someone get close enough to matter. Rowan was the exception. Rowan was the thing she had not planned for and could not have survived without. He was born in March, 7 months after she arrived in Kettridge Bay, in the hospital in the next town over, under the name Claire Moran. She held him the first time and thought, "This is the only clean thing that has ever happened to me." She cried, finally. The first real crying since that basement, since the rain, since the airplane with her knees pulled to her chest. She cried until a nurse quietly brought her water and didn't say anything, just patted her arm once and left. Rowan grew the way some children do, sideways, all instinct and intelligence before the emotional vocabulary catches up. By 4, he was taking apart small appliances to see how they worked. By 7, he had read most of what passed for a science section at the Kettridge Bay Public Library. He wasn't a solemn child. He laughed easily, made friends without effort, possessed the particular social ease of someone who genuinely liked people. But he was also watchful in a way that Serena recognized and did not allow herself to name. She didn't talk about his father. She told him, when he was old enough to ask seriously, that his father had been someone she'd loved in a different life, in a different city, in a version of herself that didn't exist anymore, that he hadn't known about Rowan, that the separation was not about anything Rowan had done or been. Rowan had considered this for approximately 30 seconds and then asked what was for dinner. He brought it up again exactly twice over the following years. Both times, Serena answered as honestly as she could without answering at all. Both times, Rowan listened carefully, nodded, and let it rest. He was 11, the autumn, everything collapsed. The highway accident happened on a Tuesday afternoon in October. Rowan was coming back from a school field trip to the Marine Biology Center 2 towns north. The bus had already dropped him at the roadside pickup point, and he was waiting for Serena to collect him, watching a red-tailed hawk work the thermals above the ridge, when he heard the sound, not the crash itself, but the aftermath. The terrible stillness that follows impact. A silver sedan had gone off the road about 40 yards down the embankment. Not a catastrophic roll, but far enough over the lip that the driver couldn't get the door open against the slope. Rowan didn't think about it. He was already moving. He got down the embankment faster than any 11-year-old had a right to, grabbed a rock to break the window, cleared the glass with his sleeve, and had the driver's side door wrenched open inside of 3 minutes. The man behind the wheel was 70, maybe older, with the kind of weathered stillness that meant either shock or something worse. Rowan checked his pulse the way Serena had shown him years ago. 2 fingers on the wrist, not the neck, she'd told him. The neck's for when you really don't have another option. And then he talked to the man, kept talking, kept him conscious and still until the paramedics arrived 18 minutes later. The man's name was Edmund Hale. Rowan didn't know that. He didn't know anything about him. He'd handed things off to the paramedics and climbed back up the embankment and was sitting on his backpack eating a granola bar when Serena pulled up, looked at the emergency vehicles, and looked at her son. "I didn't do anything," Rowan said. "I just helped." "I know," Serena said, and hugged him in a way she usually didn't, hard, sudden, the kind of embrace that's really about the person doing the holding. She didn't know then that a highway department camera mounted on a pole half a mile back had captured the whole thing. She didn't know that Edmund Hale was not a retired school teacher or a traveling salesman or any of the ordinary things she might have assumed. She didn't know that within 6 hours of reaching the hospital, Edmund had made 2 phone calls, and the second one had been answered in a Manhattan penthouse by a man who hadn't slept a full night in 12 years. She didn't know that the footage, with Rowan's face clear and unobstructed in the gray afternoon light, had been forwarded by encrypted message to a phone that Damien Vescari carried with him everywhere, along with a photograph he had not stopped carrying since the night he realized Serena was gone. She didn't know any of it. She drove home through the long coastal dusk with Rowan asleep in the passenger seat, his head against the window, and she thought about the hawk she'd seen circling when she pulled up. She thought about how it must look from up there, the curved road, the silver glint of the ocean, all of it small and manageable and contained. She thought she was safe. She had been thinking that for 12 years, and it had always been approximately true. It stopped being true the following Thursday. She was locking up the clinic when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She let it go to voicemail, which she did with every unknown number, always, without exception. There was no voicemail. The number texted instead. 4 words. Get out of town. She stared at it in the parking lot for 10 full seconds, the keys in her hand, the cold, salt wind pressing against her back. Then she got in her car and drove home in 6 minutes instead of the usual 12. Rowan was at the kitchen table with his homework spread across half of it and a bowl of cereal that had gone soggy from sitting too long. He looked up when she came in. "You look bad," he said. "I'm fine." "You look like you saw something." "I'm fine, Ro." She set her bag down, picked it up again, set it down again. "Have you noticed anyone around the house? Any cars that seemed parked a long time, or anyone you didn't recognize?" He put down his pencil. He was watching her with that careful attention she'd spent 11 years trying not to think about, because it belonged to someone else's face on someone else she had once known. "Mom," he said. "What's going on?" "Probably nothing," she said. "Probably nothing. Finish your cereal." She spent the next 20 minutes standing in the kitchen pretending to make dinner and checking every window without making it obvious she was checking every window. The street was quiet. The neighbor's dog was barking at something in the yard next door. 2 houses down, someone had their porch light on. At 9:30, she went into her bedroom, reached under the loose floorboard beside the radiator, and took out the envelope she had put there 11 years ago and checked every 6 months without exception. $2,000 in cash, 2 sets of identification, a burner phone she replaced every year whether or not she needed to, a small photograph she never looked at directly. She sat on the edge of the bed with the envelope in her lap. She had hoped she would never have to open it again. She decided she would give it one more night. If nothing happened, maybe it was nothing. Maybe the text was a wrong number. Maybe someone out there was genuinely trying to warn someone else, someone who happened to share an unlisted number with a woman named Claire Moran in a town most people had never heard of. She told herself this the way you tell yourself things at 9:30 at night, when the alternative is a terror that has no floor. She was still telling herself this at 11:15 when the car parked at the end of her block cut its lights and didn't move. She saw it through the gap in the bedroom curtain. Dark SUV, no plates visible from this angle. The engine was still running. She could see the faint exhaust curl in the cold air. She moved before she finished deciding to move. Down the hall, hand on Rowan's door, quiet enough not to wake him, just enough to see him there in the dark, still and sleeping. Then back to her room. Shoes on, jacket, the envelope inside her jacket, her phone in her back pocket. She stood in her bedroom doorway and looked at the hall and thought, this is the moment. Every version of this moment she had rehearsed in her head for 12 years, every middle-of-the-night inventory she'd taken of what she would do, it all converged here, in this hallway, in this house that smelled like Rowan's shampoo and old wood and the sea. Then she heard the first window break, not the front, the back, the kitchen. And all the rehearsed versions of this moment stopped being useful. She went for Rowan. She hit his door with her palm, not a knock, a single hard impact, and had it open before the sound finished traveling. "Up," she said. "Right now. Don't turn the light on." Rowan was already sitting up. He was that kind of sleeper, not groggy, not slow, eyes open and tracking before most adults would have registered that someone was in the room. He looked at her face and did not ask a single question. He reached for his shoes. She loved him for that. She had always loved him for that particular quality, the ability to read a room before the room explained itself. She had never let herself think too hard about where it came from. "Back door?" he whispered. "Compromised. Front we can't see clearly. We go out the side, through the Parker's yard, cut down to the alley." He was already standing, shoes on, jacket grabbed from the hook on the back of his door. 11 years old and moving with the focused quiet of someone who had been trained for this, except he hadn't been trained for anything. This was just who he was. They made it to the hallway. The kitchen was dark, but she could hear movement in there, careful, deliberate, the kind of movement that belonged to someone who did this professionally and was not rushing because they didn't believe anyone in this house was awake yet. She put her hand on Rowan's shoulder and steered him toward the side door off the laundry room. Old door, stiff hinges. She'd meant to fix the squeal in it for 3 years and never had. She took the handle with both hands, lifted slightly to take the weight off the hinge pin, and eased it open. Cold air hit them. The narrow side passage between her house and the Parker's fence was dark and smelled like wet leaves and the residue of somebody's garbage cans. They moved through it in single file. Rowan first, Serena's hand on his back. They were 6 steps from the rear fence when the motion sensor light on the Parker's back porch snapped on. It lit the passage like a stage. "Run," Serena said, and Rowan ran. She was 2 steps behind him when she heard the man behind them come around the corner of the house. She didn't look back. She had learned that in the first weeks after leaving New York, the looking back costs you fractions of seconds, and the fractions are what kill you. She grabbed the top of the fence, took the drop on the other side harder than she'd intended, felt something sharp in her left ankle that she immediately decided not to acknowledge, and ran. Rowan was already at the alley's far end, looking back for her. "Keep going," she said. "Don't wait." He didn't wait. But he also didn't go far enough ahead that she'd lose sight of him, and she understood he had made a decision about that and wasn't going to unmake it. They came out of the alley onto the back service road that ran behind the commercial strip on Dunmore Street. The diner's kitchen exhaust fan was running, loud and constant, a single streetlight 200 yards down. No cars, no people. She grabbed Rowan's arm and pulled him into the shadow of the diner's loading dock and pressed her back against the brick and listened. Footsteps. More than one set. Moving in from the alley they'd just exited and, she tilted her head, from the far end of Dunmore Street as well. They had someone on the street. They'd anticipated the exit. Rowan was watching her, reading her face the way he always did. "How many?" he whispered. She looked at him, 11 years old, asking tactical questions in a cold alley at midnight with the calm of someone older and steadier than he had any right to be. "At least 3, she said. He nodded once, then he pointed up. The fire escape on the side of the building adjacent to the diner, bottom rung about 8 feet off the ground. She saw it and looked at him and thought, "I raised you, didn't I?" She laced her hands together. He stepped into them without hesitation, and she boosted him, and he caught the rung and pulled himself up with a grunt that was the first fully human, fully 11-year-old sound he'd made since she woke him. She jumped for the rung herself, caught it on the second attempt, hauled herself up with arms that were already burning. They climbed 1 level, pressed against the exterior wall, and looked down. 2 men moving along the service road. Dark jackets. One of them had something in his hand she didn't need better light to identify. "Mom," Rowan said, very quietly, very close to her ear. "I see them." Who are they? She had told herself for 11 years that she would know what to say when this moment came. She had rehearsed versions of this conversation too, the same way she'd rehearsed the evacuation, the same way she'd rehearsed everything. She'd told herself she would be honest, that she wouldn't make him carry the weight of a lie on top of everything else. What she said was, "People from before." Rowan absorbed this. The 2 men below had stopped. One of them was on a radio or a phone. "Before Kettridge Bay?" Rowan asked. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is it because of my dad?" She turned to look at him. His face in the dark was 12 years of everything she had run from and everything she had run toward, and she could not find a single word that felt adequate. "I don't know yet," she said, and it was the most honest thing she'd said to him in years. What she didn't say, what she didn't know yet, what she couldn't possibly have known as she crouched on that fire escape with her son and listened to the men below coordinate in low voices, was that the man who had sent those men was not Damien Viscari, and that Damien himself was already in Oregon. Already moving through the dark toward the address he'd spent 6 days tracking. Already too late to prevent what was happening, and not yet too late to stop what came next. Below them, one of the men looked up. The man below looked up for 3 full seconds. Serena didn't breathe. She felt Rowan go completely still beside her. Not the stillness of fear, but something more controlled than that. Something that made the back of her throat tighten in a way she couldn't afford to examine right now. The man's gaze swept the fire escape, caught on nothing, moved on. He said something into his radio and walked past the loading dock and disappeared around the front of the building. She let the breath out through her nose. Slow. Controlled. "We have maybe 90 seconds before they circle back," she said. "Where are we going?" She had $4,300 in the envelope inside her jacket, 2 identities, and a burner phone. She had a son with no shoes beyond the ones on his feet and no coat beyond the one he'd grabbed off his hook. She had a left ankle that was complaining louder with every passing minute. "There's a motel off Route 9, she said. "The Harbor View. Cash only, no cameras in the lot. Owner doesn't ask questions." "You already knew about it." "I know about a lot of things." He looked at her with those eyes and said nothing, which was somehow worse than questions. They came down the fire escape on the far side of the building, away from Dunmore Street, and moved through the dark in the direction of the highway with the particular urgency of people who are not running, because running attracts attention, but who are also not walking the way people walk when everything is fine. The Harbor View had 16 units and a vacancy sign that blinked on the second flash. The man at the front desk was watching something on a tablet with headphones in and barely looked up when Serena put $200 in cash on the counter and asked for a room at the back. He gave her a key attached to a plastic fob the size of a deck of cards. Unit 14, end of the row. 1 window facing the tree line, 1 door facing the lot. She checked both before she let Rowan sit down. He sat on the edge of the bed nearest the wall and looked at his hands. "You want to tell me something," she said. "I want you to tell me something," he said. "There's a difference." "Ro? You knew this was going to happen." He looked up, not accusing, just stating it the way he stated things, flatly and without decoration. "The stuff under the floorboard. You've had that there the whole time." "Yes." "How long have you been waiting for this?" She sat down on the other bed. Her ankle was swelling inside her shoe, and she didn't take the shoe off because she didn't want to see how bad it was. "Since before you were born." He absorbed this. Outside, a truck moved along Route 9, headlights sweeping briefly across the curtain. Both of them watched the light move and disappear. "Is my dad dangerous?" Rowan asked. "I thought he was," she said. "For a long time I was certain." "And now?" "Now I don't know." She pressed her palms flat on her thighs. "And I don't know which version of that is scarier." Rowan thought about this with the same methodical patience he applied to everything. The same patience that had disassembled every broken appliance in their house, that had worked through library books 2 grade levels above what his teachers assigned, that had sat with the paramedics at the highway accident and done exactly what needed doing without anyone telling him to. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay? I'm not going to pretend I'm not freaked out," he said. "But okay, what do we do next?" She looked at her son and felt something move through her chest that she didn't have a clean word for. Pride was too small. Grief was in there somewhere. Love so specific and particular it felt almost unbearable. "We sleep in shifts," she said. "I take first watch." She was 3 hours into the watch, sitting in the chair beside the window with the curtain cracked 2 inches when the burner phone buzzed. Same unknown number as before. This time she answered. Silence on the line, then breathing. Then a voice she had not heard in 12 years, and had heard every night in the architecture of her own sleep whether she wanted to or not. "Serena." 1 word. Just her name. But the way he said it, like a man who has finally surfaced after a long time underwater and isn't sure yet if the air is real, hit her somewhere behind the sternum, and she had to concentrate to keep her voice level. "How did you get this number?" "The same way I found the town," Damien said. "Edmund Hale." She closed her eyes. The highway. The accident. Rowan on the embankment with a rock in his hand, breaking a window to save a man he had never met. The man in the car. she said. He's been with me for 22 years. He saw the footage from the highway camera before I did, and he called me because... A pause. Something moved in his voice, something that had no clean name. Because the boy's eyes. He recognized them. Serena said nothing. He has my eyes, Damien said. Damien, I'm not calling to fight about it. I'm calling because the men who hit your house tonight are not my men. She went very still. You expect me to believe that? I expect you to think about it, he said, and his voice had the same quality she remembered. Not softness, never softness, but a kind of precision that went bone deep, as if he'd stripped every unnecessary thing from his words and left only the load-bearing ones. If I wanted you brought in, you'd have been brought in. Not a window break, not a foot chase through alleys. You'd have never heard them coming. She hated that he was right. She hated that she had already thought this, already registered the sloppiness of the operation, the motion sensor, the single man checking the fire escape, the radio coordination that was good but not seamless. Vescari people were seamless. She'd watched enough of it during the 2 years she'd spent inside that world to know the difference between professionals and very good amateurs. Who then? She said. I think you already know whose name is at the end of that question. She stood up from the chair, moved to the wall beside the window, away from any potential angle on the glass. Old habit. Silas? He found out I was looking for you. That's the only explanation that works. He has his own network, separate from mine, has been for years. I didn't fully understand how separate until about 4 months ago. Why would Silas come after me now, after 12 years? Because of the boy, Damien said, and something shifted in his voice. Not sentiment, something harder than that. Something that sounded like controlled fury with a very tight lid on it. Serena, I need you to think back. When Rowan was born, was there anything, any procedure, any implant, anything the hospital did that seemed standard at the time, but that you didn't fully authorize? The question landed strangely. She frowned at the wall. Why? Please just answer it. He had a cardiac monitoring chip placed at 6 weeks. He was flagged for a minor arrhythmia. It resolved on its own inside a year. The device was supposed to be inert after that. She paused. The referral came through a specialist, someone the clinic recommended. What was the clinic? Harmon Pediatric Associates, Portland. Silence on the line. Long enough that she pulled the phone from her ear to check if the call had dropped. Damien. Harmon Pediatric was a Vescari shell company until 2017, he said. My uncle's side of the operation. I didn't know about it until I pulled the financial records this past spring. The room felt smaller. She sat down on the floor with her back against the wall because her legs had made a unilateral decision about weight bearing. The chip, she said. I don't know yet what's on it, but Silas has been moving money for 15 years through encrypted bearer systems, and 6 months ago the primary access architecture went dark. No key, no recovery. Whatever he built, he needs something to unlock it. Damien stopped. He's been looking for Rowan for at least 2 years. I just didn't know that until I started tracing where his people had been moving. She pressed the back of her head against the wall and stared at the water-stained ceiling of Unit 14 and listened to her son breathing in the bed 6 feet away and understood, with a clarity that was almost physical in its completeness, that the 12 years she had spent building a safe distance between her son and the world she'd escaped had never actually been distance at all. The world had simply been waiting, patient and quiet, for the moment to close it. Where are you? She said. 40 minutes out. She pulled the phone from her ear, put it back. You're already here. I've been in the state for 3 days, he said. I was trying to figure out how to approach without... He stopped. The precision in his voice developed a crack. Just one, just briefly. Without making it worse. And instead Silas's people showed up first. Yes. She stood up. Her ankle screamed and she ignored it with the focus of someone who has had extensive practice ignoring the things her body said. She moved to the window and looked out at the lot. Empty, the tree line dark, Route 9 a distant hum. If you come here and I decide you're lying, she said, I will not hesitate. I know that. And you're coming anyway. Serena. His voice was very quiet. I have been looking for you for 12 years. There isn't a version of this where I don't come." She ended the call. She stood at the window for a long moment. Then she went to the second bed and put her hand on Rowan's shoulder. He was already awake. He had probably been awake for a while. "Who was on the phone?" he asked. She took a breath, let it out. "Your father," she said. Rowan sat up slowly. He didn't say anything. He looked at her with those eyes, Damien's eyes. She had always known it, had told herself it didn't matter, had built 11 years of daily life on top of that particular lie. And he waited. "He's coming here," Serena said. "Tonight." "Is he—" Rowan stopped, recalibrated. "Should I be scared of him?" "I don't know," she said. "I spent 12 years being certain about who he was, and I'm finding out tonight how certain I actually was." Rowan nodded slowly, pulled his knees to his chest. He looked for the first time since she'd woken him like an 11-year-old. "Were you in love with him?" he asked. The question was so direct that she almost smiled. Almost. "Yes," she said. "I was." "What happened?" "I thought I watched him do something terrible," she said. "So I ran." "And did he do something terrible?" She looked at her son. "That's what tonight is going to tell me." But Damien arrived at 11 minutes to 3. She heard the car before she saw it. No headlights. Engine dropped to idle 50 yards out, pulling into the far end of the lot the way someone does when they're being careful about angles and sightlines. She was at the window when he got out. He was bigger than she remembered, or maybe she had softened the memory, filed down the edges over 12 years until the version of him in her head fit more comfortably into the category of the monster she needed him to be. The man who crossed the parking lot moved with the same economy she remembered. Nothing wasted, nothing decorative. He'd grown into the authority he used to wear slightly too large. It fit him now. That was the most frightening thing. She opened the door before he knocked. They stood in the doorway and looked at each other across 12 years of accumulated wreckage. He looked at her face, then, past her shoulder, at Rowan sitting on the bed. Something happened in Damien Viscari's face that she had not seen there in the 2 years she'd known him. Not in arguments, not in moments of pressure, not in the rare unguarded instants she'd catalogued like evidence. A kind of shattering that was also a kind of recognition. He looked at Rowan and his jaw moved, and he didn't say anything for a long time. Rowan looked back at him, measuring, fearless in the way children can be when they've already decided something. "You have my eyes," Damien said. It came out rougher than he'd probably intended. "I know," Rowan said. "Mom told me." Damien looked at Serena. "Just now?" "Just now," she confirmed. He nodded once. Then he came inside, and she closed the door behind him, and the three of them occupied the small room with the weight of everything that had never been said pressing against all four walls simultaneously. "Tell me about the chip," Serena said. Because that was the ground she could stand on. The practical thing. The thing that wasn't 12 years of grief and anger and a love she had never managed to fully dismantle, regardless of how many reasons she'd given herself. Damien pulled a chair from the small table by the wall, turned it around, and sat with his forearms on the back. He looked tired in a way that wasn't about the hour. "What I know is incomplete. What I know is that Silas embedded access credentials for an offshore financial network inside a medical device placed in a child. Your child. Which means he planned this before Rowan was born." "That's not possible," Serena said. "He couldn't have known I was pregnant when I left." "He knew before you did," Damien said. "He had the clinic surveilled. He's had a file on you since the night you ran." The silence that followed had its own texture. "He let me run," she said. "He arranged for you to run." She sat down on the edge of the bed. Rowan put his hand on her arm, a small and entirely instinctive gesture, and she covered it with hers without looking at him. "The massacre," she said, "the night I left." "Was organized by Silas," Damien said, and his voice went flat and careful, the way voices do when they're carrying something that has been heavy for a very long time. "Those 3 men were his people. He killed them himself, or had them killed, and staged the scene so that you would see what you saw. So that you would run, so that he could track where you went. Because he needed me to have the baby," Serena said. "Because he needed Rowan," Damien said, And he couldn't take him at birth without exposing himself. So he let you live, let you build a life, let the boy grow old enough to be found and taken cleanly. He's been patient for 11 years. Rowan had not moved. He was listening with absolute attention, the way he listened to things that mattered, and Serena watched him process it, watched him take the information that his existence had been engineered by someone he'd never met, for reasons that had nothing to do with who he actually was, and fold it into himself with a steadiness she would have found alarming in anyone else. "So what do we do?" Rowan said. Both adults looked at him. "We can't stay here," he said. "They already lost us once. They'll reposition. They probably have someone on Route 9 already." He looked at Damien. "You came in dark. That buys us maybe an hour before someone traces the car." Damien looked at the boy for a long, still moment. Then he looked at Serena with an expression that needed no translation. "He's right," Damien said. "I know he's right," Serena said. She stood, picked up the envelope from the nightstand. Her ankle had stiffened badly in the last hour, and she took the first step with her jaw set against it. Damien's eyes dropped to her foot. "You're hurt. I'm mobile." "Serena?" "I said I'm mobile." She looked at him directly. "We need to establish something right now before we go anywhere together. You do not make decisions for me. You do not manage me. You do not get to walk back into this situation and run it. Are we clear?" He held her gaze. "Clear." "And whatever we're walking into," she said, "whatever comes next, if I find out at any point that you're not telling me everything, I take Rowan and I disappear again, and this time you won't find us." The room held its breath. "I believe you," Damien said. And then, quieter. "I've spent 12 years believing in you. That part isn't going to change." It was not a romantic statement. It was not designed to be. It landed the way true things land, without softness, without ornamentation, and she felt it settle somewhere she hadn't known was still waiting to receive it. "There's a warehouse on the south edge of Kettridge Bay," Damien said. "My people secured it 2 days ago. It's clean, it's stocked, and it has 2 exits." "Your people are in town," Serena said. "How many?" 4, all trusted." "You were that certain you'd find us." "I was certain I'd find you," he said. "I wasn't certain of anything else." She looked at him for another long moment. Then she looked at Rowan, who was already standing, already had his jacket zipped, already waiting by the door like someone who understood that the conversation was over and the next thing needed to start. She thought about everything she'd built in Kettridge Bay, the clinic, the house with the loose floorboard, the slow, careful, ordinary life she had constructed piece by piece over 11 years with the deliberate patience of someone who knew it could be taken at any moment and built it anyway. Because what was the alternative? What was the alternative to trying? She thought about all of it, and she picked up her bag and she walked to the door. "If this goes wrong," she said to Damien, her hand on the frame, "it goes wrong because of your choices, not mine. I need you to carry that." "I know," he said. "Say it." He met her eyes. "If this goes wrong, it's on me." She nodded once, opened the door. The cold came in off the Pacific, salt and dark and absolute, and the 3 of them stepped out into it together, not as a family, not yet, not anything that clean, but as 3 people bound by blood and damage and the particular momentum of a night that had already passed the point where anyone could stop what was coming. Behind them, on Route 9, a pair of headlights appeared from the direction of town and began moving slowly toward the Harborview's lot. Damien saw them the same moment she did. "Move," he said. And they moved. Damien moved first. He put his body between the approaching headlights, and the 2 of them in a motion that was purely reflexive. No calculation in it, just the instinct of someone who has spent years standing between things and the people behind him. His hand went to the inside of his jacket. Serena grabbed Rowan's arm and pulled him left, toward the tree line at the edge of the lot, away from the light. The car slowed. Not the aggressive deceleration of pursuit, something more tentative. It pulled into the far end of the lot and stopped, and the headlights cut and a man got out alone with his hands visible at his sides. "It's Marcus," Damien said. He didn't relax exactly, but his hand came out of the jacket empty. The man who crossed the lot was late 30s, heavy-set through the shoulders, moving with the kind of deliberate calm that read as professional rather than natural. He stopped 6 feet from Damien and looked at Serena and Rowan with an expression that registered nothing. "We have a problem," Marcus said. "Define problem." "Silas's people have 3 vehicles on Route 9 and 2 more on the coastal road. They're running a perimeter, not a pursuit. They're waiting for us to move." "How many total?" 11 confirmed. Possibly more I haven't seen. Damien looked at Serena. She was already doing the math. "The warehouse," she said. "Is it compromised?" "Not yet," Marcus said. "But if we move toward it, we lead them there." "Then we don't move toward it," Rowan said. Every adult in the lot turned to look at the 11-year-old standing in the tree line with pine needles on his jacket and his arms crossed against the cold. "The Marine Center," he said. 2 towns north. We went there on the field trip. It's closed at night, the dock goes out 300 yards, and there's a boat rental facility on the east side that doesn't have cameras on the water-facing side. I noticed because one of the other kids was trying to sneak a look at the equipment shed, and the angle was blind. Marcus looked at Damien. Damien looked at Serena. "Do you have a boat?" she asked Marcus. "A beat. We have access to one." "Then we're not having this conversation anymore," she said, and started moving. The Marine Center's parking lot was empty and dark, which was the only thing that had gone cleanly in the last 4 hours. Marcus had made a call from the car, 2 words, a location, nothing else. And by the time they reached the east dock, there was a man already there with a key to the equipment shed and a flat-bottom bay cruiser idling low at the secondary tie-up. The water was black and the wind off the Pacific had picked up, and it smelled like diesel and brine. Rowan climbed aboard without being asked and sat at the bow with his hands on his knees and watched the dark water with the particular attention of someone who has decided that watching is the most useful thing available to him right now. Serena got on last. Her ankle folded on the dock's edge, and she caught herself on the railing and bit down on the sound before it came out. Damien's hand was at her elbow. She felt it there for exactly the 2 seconds she needed it, and then she was stable and she moved away and he let her. Marcus took the wheel. They moved out into the bay without running lights. No one spoke for several minutes. The shore lights of Kettridge Bay receded and the water opened up around them, dark in every direction, the kind of dark that resets something in the chest whether you want it to or not. Rowan turned from the bow and looked at Damien. "Tell me about the chip," he said. Damien looked at Serena. "He has a right to know," she said. "It's in his body." Damien leaned forward with his forearms on his knees, mirror of the position he'd taken on the chair back at the motel, and he talked to Rowan the way Serena had noticed he talked to everyone, without condescension, without performance, just the load-bearing words in the right order. He told him about the offshore network, about the bearer access system Silas had built over 15 years. Money moved through shell architectures so complex that dismantling one layer revealed only the next, an endless financial maze with no center visible from the outside. He told him that 6 months ago the primary key had gone dark, locked behind an encryption schema that required physical proximity to a specific hardware token to unlock. "The chip is the token," Rowan said. "We believe so." "How much money are we talking about?" Damien was quiet for a moment. "Enough that 11 armed men in coastal Oregon is a reasonable expense for whoever wants access to it." Rowan absorbed this with the same methodical patience he brought to everything. He looked out at the water, looked back. "Can it be removed?" he said. "The chip?" "Yes," Serena said. "I can do it myself with the right equipment. It's subcutaneous, just below the left clavicle. 20-minute procedure." "Then that's what we do," Rowan said. "We take it out, we hand it to whoever needs it to not kill us, and we go home." "It's not that simple," Damien said. "Why not?" "Because Silas doesn't leave witnesses," Damien said, and his voice had the flatness of something that had been true for a long time and was no longer painful to say, just factual. "The chip is leverage while you have it. Once it's transferred, you're a liability." Rowan was quiet. "So we need something else to offer him," Rowan said. "Or we need to remove him entirely," Damien said. The boat moved through the dark, and the water broke white against the hull, and Serena sat in the middle of all of it and looked at her son negotiating his own survival with the calm of a chess player, and she felt the particular grief of a parent who watches their child be capable of something they should never have had to be capable of. The warehouse was a converted fish processing facility on the industrial waterfront south of town. Marcus brought the boat around to the service dock at the building's water-facing side, and they tied off in the dark and went in through the loading entrance. Inside, 4 of Damien's people, a folding table covered in laptops and maps, a medical kit, food that someone had bought from somewhere, and the low industrial hum of a generator running on the far wall. The space smelled like old salt and rust and machine oil, and it was cold in the way that large, empty buildings are cold, comprehensively, structurally, as if the cold was load-bearing. Serena went straight for the medical kit. She needed to look at her ankle while she still had the option of looking at it voluntarily. She sat on a crate and pulled her shoe off and looked at what she'd been carrying for the last several hours. The joint was swollen and darkening along the outer edge. Not broken, she could identify the specific quality of broken, and this wasn't it, but badly sprained, the kind that would be genuinely immobilizing by morning if she didn't tape it properly now. She found the elastic wrap in the kit and began working. Damien crouched in front of her. "Let me," he said. "I'm a doctor." "You're also the patient." She looked at him for a beat, then she handed him the wrap. He took her foot in both hands and began working with a precision that surprised her, then didn't. She remembered, from the 2 years she'd spent inside his world, that he'd had field medical training. He'd had training in a lot of things that didn't fit the public image of what he was. "You're angry," he said, without looking up. "I'm always angry," she said. "Specify." "At me, still, underneath all the practical problem-solving. Damien." "I'm not asking you to not be," he said. "I just want to know if we're going to do this, whatever this is, with that sitting between us." She looked at the top of his head while he wrapped her ankle with the focused care of someone who understood that doing a thing correctly was its own form of communication. "You let me believe you were a murderer," she said, "for 12 years. I didn't know you believed it. That's not a defense." "No," he said, "it's not." He tied off the wrap and looked up. "I'm not trying to defend it. I'm trying to tell you that when I found out you were gone, when I understood that you had seen that basement and run, I didn't blame you. I never blamed you. I blame myself for every structure I'd built that made that moment possible." She held his gaze and said nothing. "And I've spent 12 years building something different," he said. "Not better, necessarily. I'm not going to tell you I became a good man, but a different one." "What kind?" "The kind that takes apart the things that hurt people," he said, "even when the things that hurt people are things I built." She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the bay water moved against the dock, the same patient repetition it had maintained for longer than anyone in the building had been alive. "I need you to not expect forgiveness right now," she said. "I need you to understand that what I'm doing tonight is about Rowan, not about you and me." "Understood," he said. "And I need you to understand that after this is over, whatever over looks like, I get to decide what comes next. Not you, not the situation, me." "Yes," he said, simply, without negotiation. She nodded once. He stood up. She put her shoe back on. "But what?" The first laptop on the table pulled up the encrypted network architecture that Damien's tech man, a young guy named Priya who looked like he should be finishing a computer science degree somewhere and probably had been before something redirected him, had been mapping for 4 months. It was displayed as a branching diagram that covered most of the screen, layers of shell companies and account numbers and routing paths that converged at a single dark node at the center. "The lock," Priya said, pointing at the dark node. "Everything flows in. Nothing flows out without authentication from the primary token." "Which is sitting in my son's chest," Serena said. "Yes, ma'am." "Can we replicate the signal, spoof the authentication without using the physical device?" Priya hesitated. "Theoretically." "How long?" "With the right equipment, 72 hours. Maybe 60 if things go well." "We don't have 72 hours," Damien said. "No," Serena agreed. "We don't." She stared at the diagram. Something was nagging at her, a thread at the edge of her thinking that she couldn't quite catch. She'd been staring at it for 3 minutes when her phone buzzed. Not the burner. Her actual phone, which she had not turned on since leaving the house, which should have been dark and useless in the inside pocket of her jacket. She pulled it out. It was on. She hadn't turned it on. There was a text message from a contact listed only as H. He knows where you are. The warehouse was always a secondary target. Check your people. She looked up from the phone. Across the table, Damien was talking to Marcus. Priya was typing. 2 other men she didn't know were at the far end of the space near the generator. She looked at the phone again, then at Damien. "Damien," she said. Something in her voice moved everyone in the room, the quality of it. He turned immediately. She held up the phone. He crossed to her and read the message. She watched his face. He turned to Marcus. "Who knew about this location?" he said. "The 4 of us," Marcus said. "Plus Priya. That's it." "And who arranged the boat?" Marcus paused, 1 beat too long. "I made the call," he said. "Standard protocol." "Who answered?" "Croft." Damien's face did something very controlled and very cold. "Croft is in Philadelphia." "He said he had a contact here. Said he'd arranged it last week when you told him we were moving to Oregon." "I didn't tell Croft we were moving to Oregon," Damien said. The room went very quiet. Marcus looked at Damien, and in his face was the particular look of a man who has just seen the shape of something he should have seen much earlier and is doing rapid, desperate math on what it means. He called me 2 days ago. He knew the timeline. He knew the location. I assumed. Croft works for Silas, Damien said, flat, absolute. He has for at least the last year. I've been trying to confirm it for 3 weeks. Damien, I didn't know. I know you didn't know, Damien said, and his voice was terrifyingly even. But someone does know, and they know exactly where we are. Serena was already moving toward Rowan, who was sitting against the far wall with a bottle of water and a map he'd taken off the table and was studying with quiet focus. She put herself between him and the room. "How long since the boat docked?" she said. 20 minutes, Marcus said. "Maybe 22. They have boats on the water?" "If Croft told them the route, yes." She looked at Damien. He was already looking at her. "We have maybe 10 minutes, she said. "Less if they pushed hard from the Route 9 position." "The north exit," Damien said to Marcus. "Get the car. Now." Marcus moved. 2 of the other men moved with him. Priya was already pulling hard drives out of the laptops, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had evacuated a workspace before. And then every light in the building went out. Not a flicker. Not a surge. Total, comprehensive darkness, the generator silenced mid-hum, and in the sudden black the only sound was the water against the dock and everyone in the room breathing. Serena reached for Rowan in the dark and found his shoulder. He was already standing. "Stay with me," she said. "Don't let go." "I won't," he said. A sound from the north exit. Heavy, deliberate. Not Marcus returning. Something else. Then a voice from the dark, amplified, fed through something external, bouncing off the corrugated walls with a quality that made it impossible to locate. "Damien." The voice of a man who has spent his entire life waiting for a specific moment and has finally arrived at it. "I think we've been patient with each other long enough." Silas Vescari, in the building, already inside. Serena felt Rowan's hand tighten on her arm, and she tightened back, and in the absolute dark she ran every variable she had, exits, distances, the medical kit she'd left on the crate, the layout she'd memorized when they came in, and understood with a clarity that was almost surgical that the next 60 seconds were going to determine everything, and that the woman who had spent 12 years being careful and measured and strategic had exactly no margin left for any of those qualities. What she had was a sun standing beside her in the dark. What she had was 12 years of controlled terror that had finally run out of room to be controlled. What she had was the particular ferocity of someone who has survived by being cautious, long past the point where caution was working, and has just understood that the only thing left is to stop being cautious entirely. In the dark, she let go of Rowan's hand long enough to reach into the medical kit by feel, and what she found there was not a surgical instrument and not a bandage and not anything a person uses to heal. "Rowan," she said very quietly, very close to his ear, When I say run, you run toward the water, not the dock, the rocks on the south side. You climb down and you stay low and you do not come back for me. Do you understand? Mom, do you understand? A pause. She felt him breathe. Yes, he said. From somewhere in the dark, Silas's amplified voice came again, patient and almost conversational, with the calm of a man who believed he had already won. The boy, Silas said. That's all I need. Send him out and everyone else walks away. I've always been a reasonable man. Damien's voice came from somewhere to her left, maybe 15 feet away, low and controlled. You've never been a reasonable man. Perspective, Silas said. You burned a lot of things building your perspective, nephew. How much of it was worth the cost? Ask me again when this is over, Damien said. In the dark, Serena heard movement, quiet, professional, multiple points of entry being established simultaneously. The south dock, the north exit, the loading bay where they'd come in. Silas had not come with 3 men or 5. He had come with enough, and he had come having already solved for every variable except one. He hadn't solved for her. He had spent 12 years thinking of Serena Vale as the thing Damien wanted back. The soft point, the leverage. The woman who had run from a basement and built a quiet life and raised a child and tried to stay small and stay safe. He had never once considered what 12 years of that does to a person, what it builds behind the quiet. What accumulates when someone survives long past the point they expected to survive and starts to understand finally that surviving was never the point, that the point was always what came after, and after was now, and now was here. In the dark, in a fish warehouse in coastal Oregon, with her son's life measured in the next 30 seconds. Serena Vale had been careful for 12 years. She was done being careful. She moved through the dark like she owned it. Not because she wasn't afraid. The fear was there. She could feel it in the specific tension across her shoulders, the way her vision was doing that thing where the dark seemed to pulse slightly at the edges. She'd had enough medical training to know that was adrenaline hitting the optic system, blood pressure spiking, every non-essential process in her body shutting down to feed the ones that mattered right now. She wasn't fearless. She was just done letting the fear make her small. She found the medical kit by feel. Her hands moved across the contents with the same muscle memory she used in the clinic: gauze, suture kit, the small surgical torch she used for close work, 2 syringes preloaded with lidocaine, and at the bottom, heavy and cylindrical, the emergency flare she'd added to every kit she'd ever owned since the second year in Kettridge Bay, when she'd sat down one winter night and made a list of every scenario she could imagine and what she would need for each one. She palmed the flare. Then she found the second thing she'd registered when they first came in: the generator against the far wall, and beside it the pressurized fuel line that fed it from the external tank mounted outside the building's south wall. She'd noted it the way she noted everything, automatically, cataloged, filed under things that could matter later. Later was now. She pressed her mouth close to where she estimated Rowan was standing. 30 seconds, she breathed. Count them. When you hear the sound, you run. South side, the rocks, low and fast. She felt him nod against her cheek. She moved. The floor was concrete and she'd taken her shoes off because the ankle brace changed her gait and the change made noise. The concrete was cold enough to feel through her socks immediately, but she moved heel to toe the way she'd taught herself in the first months in Kettridge Bay when she used to practice moving through her house in the dark, because the nightmares about exactly this kind of scenario had seemed, at the time, like a reasonable thing to prepare for. They had not seemed reasonable to her then. They seemed prescient now. She reached the generator in 11 seconds, found the fuel line by running her hand along the wall until her fingers hit the coupling, a standard quick-release fitting, the kind that required a quarter turn to disengage. She wrapped both hands around it. From across the building, Silas's amplified voice again. I'm going to count to 30. I want to be fair about this. You've never been fair about anything, Damien said, from a different position than before. He was moving in the dark too, she realized. Repositioning, buying time. He didn't know what she was doing, but he understood she was doing something, and he was giving her the seconds to do it. That understanding, wordless, immediate, hit her somewhere complicated, and she shoved it aside because there was no room for complicated right now. She turned the coupling, the fuel line disengaged, and she heard the liquid begin moving. Not a gush, a controlled seep, spreading across the concrete floor in the dark toward the center of the building. She gave it 8 seconds. Then she pulled the cap off the flare, positioned it toward the floor near the fuel spread, and looked in the direction of Rowan's position. "Now," she said at full volume. She heard him move, fast, clean, the sound of someone who had already committed before she said the word, and she struck the flare. The light was immediate and total and violent, the way flare light always is, red-white and throwing every shadow in the wrong direction. In the sudden illumination, she saw the building's interior like a photograph. Damien against the north wall with something in his hand, two of Silas's men near the loading bay entrance freezing in the unexpected light, Priya flat behind the folding table, Marcus down on one knee near the north exit with blood on his sleeve, and the fuel spreading dark and wet across the concrete floor between her and the south dock door. Silas's men saw it at the same moment she did. She threw the flare. It hit the fuel line and the floor ignited in a line, not an explosion, nothing cinematic, just a low, urgent wall of flame running across the concrete that divided the building into two halves as efficiently as any locked door. On her side, the south dock exit, 20 feet away. On the other side, Silas's people and the problem they represented. She ran for the door. Her ankle told her exactly what it thought of this, and she told her ankle to get in line. The south dock door was a push bar. She hit it with both forearms, and it swung out into the cold, and she was on the dock and the Pacific air hit her like a fist. And she was already scanning the rocks to the south when a hand came out of the dark and grabbed her arm. She had her elbow back before she registered that it was Rowan. "I said the rocks," she said. "I'm not leaving without you," he said. She looked at him for exactly 1 second. This boy, this infuriating, steadfast, completely Damien in miniature boy. And then she grabbed his hand, and they went for the rocks together. The south side of the waterfront building dropped to a shelf of exposed rock that ran between the dock pilings and the actual shoreline, accessible only at low tide. It was low tide. The rocks were slick and cold and covered in the kind of barnacle crust that shreds through skin like sandpaper, and Serena climbed down them with one functional ankle and one 11-year-old, and the concentrated focus of a woman who has decided that nothing else is allowed to go wrong tonight. They got down to the rock shelf and pressed into the shadow of the pilings. Above them, through the building's walls, she could hear the controlled chaos of the fire doing its work. Not consuming the structure, the fuel hadn't been enough for that, but creating the kind of internal disruption that forces everyone in a room to make immediate decisions about priorities. The gunshots came 30 seconds later, 3 of them, spaced, deliberate. Then a longer silence. Then 2 more. Rowan was counting them. She could see him doing it. "Damien," he said. "I don't know," she said. Then the south dock door opened above them, and someone came out onto the dock. One person, moving fast but not panicked. Damien dropped down to the rock shelf beside them without using the ladder, which struck her as either impressively athletic or completely reckless. And given everything she'd seen tonight, she'd stopped distinguishing between those categories where he was concerned. He was breathing hard. There was a cut above his left eye that was bleeding in the unhurried way of cuts in cold weather. He looked at Serena and Rowan in the shadows, and for just a moment, one unguarded half-second before the operational mask came back, he looked like a man who has been holding his breath for 12 years and has just been told he can stop. Then, Marcus is down. 2 of Silas's men are contained. The others pulled back when the fire started. Silas himself? Gone. He said it with the specific frustration of someone who has been here before. He doesn't stay in rooms when rooms become problems. He's been doing this longer than both of us. How long do we have before he repositions? Minutes. He'll have the perimeter tightened within 15. Marcus, she said. How bad? Shoulder. He's mobile. Priya got him out the north exit before I came down. She processed this. We need to move inland, away from the water. He'll expect us to try for the boat again. Agreed. Damien looked at Rowan. You still remember the layout from the field trip? The Marine Center connects to a coastal trail that runs north for about 2 miles, Rowan said. It comes out at the Dunmore Street overpass. From there, you can get to the highway junction without going through town. Damien looked at Serena. Don't, she said. Don't what? Look at me like that, like you're surprised he's like that. Damien almost said something, reconsidered, looked back at Rowan. Lead the way. What? They moved along the rock shelf until it rejoined the coastline path, then climbed back up to the trail level and went north in single file. Rowan first, with Damien's phone screen dimmed to almost nothing for a light source. Serena behind him, Damien at the rear. The trail was uneven and narrow, and the wind was harder here, exposed to the full length of the Pacific without the town buildings to interrupt it. Serena moved with her jaw set and her attention on the path and did not think about her ankle. She thought about the text message instead. About the contact listed only as H. He knows where you are. Check your people. Someone had been watching. Someone with access to enough information to know the warehouse was compromised before Silas's people moved on it, and enough of a reason to warn her rather than stay silent. She pulled up beside Damien as they walked. "The text I got," she said, low enough that Rowan, 6 feet ahead, wouldn't hear clearly over the wind. "Who is H?" Damien didn't answer immediately. "Damien." "Helena Marsh," he said. "She was my father's accountant before she was Silas's. She came to me 14 months ago with documents, partial records of the offshore structure. She's been feeding me information in pieces for over a year." "You have an inside source in Silas's organization." "Had," he said. "If she sent that text, she burned herself doing it. Silas will know there was a leak." "Is she safe?" "I don't know." Serena thought about a woman she'd never met making a decision in the dark that had kept her son on a rock shelf instead of in Silas Viscari's hands, and felt the particular weight of a debt she'd never be able to repay to someone she'd never be able to thank. "We need to get the chip out," she said, "tonight. Whatever happens next, Silas needs to stop having a reason to come after Rowan. The chip is the reason. If we remove it, we lose our leverage." "We never had leverage," she said. "We had a target on my son's chest and a man with enough patience to wait 11 years for it. Removing the chip doesn't eliminate the threat entirely, but it changes the math. He can't access the network without it. And if we take it out and immediately transmit the access credentials through a separate channel, flood the network, expose the accounts, make the information public, then the chip becomes worthless." Damien walked in silence for several steps. "You thought about this while we were on the rocks," he said. "I've been thinking about it since the motel," she said. "I just needed to know whether you were actually going to be useful before I told you the plan." He made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. "And am I? Useful?" She looked straight ahead at the trail. "Jury's still out." Ahead of them, Rowan stopped walking. He held up his hand, a gesture so instinctively authoritative that both adults stopped without question, and pointed to the left, toward the ridge above the trail. A light. Moving. Deliberate. Someone on the ridge moving parallel to them on a course that would intersect with the trail approximately 400 yards ahead at the point where the path narrowed between the ridge and the cliff edge. They had anticipated the trail. Serena stood in the dark with the wind pulling at her jacket and looked at the moving light and understood that they were not outrunning Silas Viscari tonight. He was not chasing them. He was directing them, closing options behind them, channeling them forward, patient as water finding the downhill path. He had done this before. He had done it 12 years ago. He had turned a basement and a frightened young woman and a single terrible moment of misunderstanding into 11 years of precisely managed pursuit, and he was doing it again now, on a coastal trail in Oregon, with better resources and no more patience left to spend. "The overpass," she said to Rowan. "Is there anything between here and there? Any structure? Any shelter? Anything that isn't open trail?" Rowan thought for 3 seconds. "There's a maintenance shed, about 100 yards past where the trail bends. It's for the coastal authority. They store equipment for the cliff erosion monitoring stations." "Locked?" "Padlocked when we passed it on the trip, but it's a standard master lock on a hasp, and the hasp was mounted with wood screws into what looked like pretty old timber." She looked at Damien. "I have a pry bar in the kit Marcus gave me," he said. "Then we're not walking into whatever's waiting at the overpass," she said. "We go to the shed, we get the chip out, and we end Silas Viscari's reason to exist tonight." She started moving before either of them responded, because she had spent 12 years waiting for permission from circumstances to finally do the thing that needed doing, and she was finished waiting. Behind her, she heard Rowan fall into step, and then Damien, and the three of them moved through the dark toward the shed and the surgery and the end of the long patience that had swallowed most of her adult life. And Serena Vale did not look back at the light on the ridge or the town behind them or any of the 12 years of wreckage she was finally, irrevocably walking away from. She looked at the path ahead. She looked at her son. She kept moving. The maintenance shed was exactly what Rowan had described, and nothing more. A low structure of weathered timber and corrugated metal crouched against the ridge like something that had been meaning to fall down for years and kept forgetting. The padlock was a master lock on a hasp mounted with 4 wood screws into timber that had been softened by a decade of Pacific moisture. Damien had it off in 40 seconds with the pry bar. Inside, erosion monitoring equipment, coiled cable, 2 folding chairs, a shelf of labeled sample containers, and a work lamp on a hook that ran off a battery pack mounted to the wall. Damien checked the battery. 60%. He handed it to Serena without being asked. She was already opening the medical kit on the floor. "Rowan," she said, "sit in the chair. Take your shirt off." He did both without comment. The cold hit him immediately, and he controlled his reaction to it. A single sharp breath through the nose and then stillness. She noted it and did not comment because commenting would make it harder for both of them. She put on the single pair of nitrile gloves in the kit, uncapped the lidocaine syringe, pressed 2 fingers below his left clavicle, and found what she was looking for. A small, firm nodule beneath the skin, roughly the size and shape of a flattened grape, positioned exactly where a cardiac monitoring chip would be placed in a 6-week-old infant by someone who knew what they were doing. She had placed the referral herself. She had trusted the specialist recommendation. She had held her infant son's hand during the procedure and been told it was routine and believed it because she had been 25 and exhausted and trying so hard to build a normal life that she had let normal be the story she told herself about everything. She pressed her jaw together and held it there for 3 seconds. "Mom," Rowan said, "it's okay." "I know," she said. "I mean it. You didn't know." "I know that too." She uncapped the syringe. "This is going to sting for about 10 seconds and then go numb. Hold still." He held still. The injection went in clean and she watched his face, the involuntary tightening around his eyes, the breath held and released, and then she counted to 45 and pressed the area again. "Feel that?" "Pressure," he said, "not pain." "Good." She picked up the scalpel. Damien was at the door, not watching. She registered this, the deliberate direction of his attention, away from what she was doing, and understood it as consideration rather than weakness. He was giving her the room. The incision was small and precise. The chip came out in under 3 minutes, trailing a filament of scar tissue from 12 years of integration with the surrounding tissue. She dropped it into one of the sample containers from the shelf, snapped the lid, and began closing. 6 sutures. Neat. She'd done worse in worse conditions. "Done," she said. Rowan looked down at the bandage she was taping over the closure. "That's it?" "That's it." "Huh." He picked up his shirt. "Felt bigger than that." Damien turned from the door. He looked at the sample container in Serena's hand. "Priya can access the network architecture remotely if I get him the chip's signal profile." He captured the chip's broadcast frequency from the diagnostic scan he ran 2 weeks ago when we were still trying to identify what we were looking for. "Call him," Serena said. "He's offline, protocol. But I have a dead drop, a coded message through a proxy server that he checks every 30 minutes. Then send it. And when he has access, I want every account in that network exposed. Public record, federal financial crimes database, international monitoring agencies, every journalist contact you have. We don't use this as leverage. We detonate it." Damien looked at her. "That takes down the entire structure. Silas loses everything." "That's the point. It also ends any negotiating position we have with him tonight." "Good," she said. "I don't want to negotiate with him. I want to remove the reason he has to keep coming after my son, permanently." She held the container up between them. In the lamp's light, the chip was barely visible, a sliver of gray against the white plastic, smaller than a thumbnail, carrying 12 years of someone else's calculated patience inside its circuitry. She put it in Damien's hand. "Send the message," she said, "and then tell me how we finish this." Damien's coded message went through the proxy at 3:47 in the morning. He showed Serena the sent confirmation, and she nodded once, and they both understood that the clock was now running on something that couldn't be stopped. Priya would get the message within 30 minutes. Network access would take another hour at minimum, possibly 2. Exposure of the accounts, the actual public detonation of Silas's financial empire, would follow as fast as Priya could push the data through the channels Damien had spent months establishing with federal contacts and investigative journalists who'd been waiting for something exactly like this. 3 hours, maybe 4. They had to stay alive for 3 to 4 hours. Silas still had people on the ridge and the perimeter and the road, and he had just watched his primary extraction target disappear into a coastal trail in the dark. He was not going to wait passively for morning. Damien's phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. 3 words and a set of coordinates. She's with us. He showed her. She looked at the coordinates, then at him. Helena Marsh, he said. Those coordinates are a boat. She's been running a parallel exit route in case the warehouse fell. He was already pulling up the map function. 40 minutes from here on foot, she has 2 of my people with her. She burned herself warning me, Serena said. That means Silas knows she flipped. She can't go back. No. Is she trustworthy? She came to me with the documents when she didn't have to, he said. She's been right about every piece of information she's passed me in 14 months. He looked at Serena directly. Yes. Serena looked at the coordinates, looked at the trail outside the shed's open door, looked at Rowan, who had his shirt back on, and was studying the trail map on Damien's phone with the calm concentration of someone for whom panic has simply never been a productive option. 40 minutes, she said. We move, but they made the first 20 minutes clean. The trail was dark and uneven, and her ankle was a sustained, specific misery that she converted into forward momentum through a combination of focus and controlled breathing. Damien moved behind her at a distance that was close enough to be useful and far enough to not be patronizing. Rowan stayed between them, matching pace without complaint, occasionally pointing out variations in the trail surface before she hit them. At the 22-minute mark, the light on the ridge reappeared. Not 1 light. 3. And they were moving faster than before. Not parallel to the trail anymore, but angling down toward it, converging. They know where we're going, Damien said. How? The coordinates. If they have Helena's phone, you said she was with your people. I said she sent a text. His voice was tight. That's not the same thing. Serena stopped walking. Damien, I know. Is it a trap? He was quiet for 2 full seconds, which was 2 seconds longer than she wanted. I don't know, he said. She looked at the lights on the ridge, looked at the trail ahead, looked at her son. What do you know? She said. I know that if it's a trap, we walk into it with no exit on a coastal trail with 11 armed men closing from 3 directions. He pulled something from inside his jacket, a compact radio, the kind that didn't require a signal tower. And I know that Marcus has this frequency. He clicked the radio twice, this static, then twice more. 6 seconds of nothing. Then Marcus's voice, rough and compressed by the hardware. Still here. Position? Dunmore Overpass. I have Priya and 1 other, and someone who says you know her. Damien's face. Put her on. A pause. Then a woman's voice, low, controlled, older. The text wasn't from me, she said. My phone was taken 40 minutes ago. Whoever sent you those coordinates has been holding them since then, waiting for you to move toward the water. The 3 lights on the ridge were closer now, 200 yards. Where are you actually? Damien said. Overpass. With your man. I have the secondary materials, the complete financial architecture on a drive, authenticated, ready to transmit the moment you tell me it's time. Serena took the radio from Damien's hand. This is Serena Vale. Do you know who I am? A pause. Yes. Did you send me the text at the motel? He knows where you are, check your people? Yes. That one was me. Why? Because I've been watching Silas Viscari destroy things for 20 years, Helena said, and I am very tired. Serena handed the radio back. The overpass. We go to the overpass. The lights are going to reach the trail in about 4 minutes regardless of which direction we go, she said. At least at the overpass, we have Marcus and cover and someone with the data we need to end this. Moving toward the water was always going to be wrong. She started moving. Come on. They left the trail at a break in the ridge vegetation and went up and over, through scrub that grabbed at clothing and terrain that had no interest in being climbed, and came down the far side onto the road that ran under the Dunmore overpass with their lungs burning and their clothes torn, and Serena's ankle filing an official formal complaint with every bone in her body. Marcus was under the overpass with Priya, and a woman Serena had never seen, 60 maybe, with the kind of face that has spent years keeping itself composed and has the lines to show for it. Helena Marsh looked at Serena the way people look at someone they've known from a distance for a long time and are finally standing in front of. The drive, Serena said. No preamble. Helena held it up. A standard encrypted thumb drive, small enough to palm. Everything. Account numbers, routing histories, beneficial ownership chains, the shell company structures back to origination. 14 years of documentation. And Priya can push it? Already set up, Priya said. He had a laptop open on the hood of the car Marcus had arrived in, running off a mobile hotspot, and he looked like someone who had been awake for 30 hours and had processed this by simply deciding sleep was a concept that applied to other people. The moment I get the chip signal handshake and the drive contents, I can push simultaneously to 6 federal data repositories and 4 investigative outlets. It goes out fragmented, so no single point can be shut down in time to stop it. How long once you start? 8 minutes to full transmission. 8 minutes, Serena said, give or take. She looked at Damien. He was looking at the road behind them, the way they'd come, the dark ridge, the lights that had been on the trail, and were now, presumably, adapting to the fact that their targets had gone somewhere unexpected. He's going to come here, Serena said. When his people report we've gone to the overpass, he's going to come himself. Yes, Damien said. So we let him, she said. We let him come here and we keep him contained for 8 minutes while Priya transmits, and when it's done there's nothing left for him to protect and no reason left for him to come after any of us. Containing Silas Viscari for 8 minutes, Marcus said from the wall, is not a small thing. No, Serena said. It's not. She looked at the drive in Helena's hand, thought about the chip in the sample container in Damien's pocket. Thought about 11 years of ordinary life built over a fault line she'd never been able to stop feeling under her feet. Thought about a boy who took apart broken appliances and read library books above his grade level and stayed calm in emergencies he should never have been in. She thought about all the things she was willing to break to put this particular night behind them. Give Priya the drive, she said to Helena, and tell me every exit point on this overpass. The waiting was the worst part, not because nothing was happening. Things were happening, Priya's fingers moving across the keyboard, Marcus checking angles, Damien working the perimeter of the overpass structure with the systematic attention of someone mapping a defensive position. Things were happening constantly. But the waiting between things was where the body caught up with itself, and Serena's body had a lot to say. She sat against the concrete wall of the overpass abutment with her leg extended and her eyes on the road and cataloged the damage. The ankle, severe sprain, will need proper imaging. A bruise across her ribs from the fence drop she hadn't noticed until it started to stiffen. The cut on her palm from the flare cap. The particular deep exhaustion that lives below muscle and bone in the cellular level where 4 hours of sustained tear has burned through reserves that take days to rebuild. Rowan sat beside her, close enough that his shoulder was against her arm. You okay? He said. I've been better. You've been worse? She thought about it. No, she said. Actually, this might be the worst. He almost smiled. Comforting. I'm a doctor. I'm accurate, not comforting. He leaned his head back against the concrete. For a moment, just a moment, he looked 11. Just exactly and only 11, which was what he was. And she felt the specific weight of that, the thing she'd been keeping at arm's length all night because there was no room for it. And now in the stillness, it arrived anyway. She put her arm around him, and he let her, and neither of them said anything for a minute. When this is over, he said. Yes. I want to actually meet him. Not in a crisis, just Meet him. She didn't say anything for a moment. That's fair. Is it going to be weird? Monumentally, she said. Okay. He thought about this. I can handle weird. I know you can. Across the overpass, Damien had stopped moving. He was standing very still, facing the road that came in from the south, and Serena recognized the quality of his stillness. It was the same stillness she'd seen in him 12 years ago when something had arrived that required every available resource to process. She stood up. 3 vehicles. Moving without speed, not rushing, not tactical approach, just arriving, the way someone arrives when they've stopped needing to hurry because they believe the situation is already resolved in their favor. The lead vehicle stopped 40 yards from the overpass. The door opened. Silas Vescari stepped out into the road. He was smaller than memory made him. Memory always inflates the things that frightened you. He was 70, lean, with the particular carriage of a man who has never once in his adult life felt physically afraid of another person. He wore a coat against the cold, and he stood in the road with his hands in his pockets, and he looked at the overpass and the people standing under it with the patient assessment of someone doing arithmetic. Damien, he said. His voice carried easily in the pre-dawn silence. I've been doing this longer than you've been alive. You understand that? Damien said nothing. The chip is out, Silas said. It wasn't a question. I know. I have people who read vital signs from distance. The boy's cardiac signature changed 40 minutes ago. So whatever you think you have, he paused. You have a piece of hardware that means nothing without the architectural key. And the architectural key is in my head, and I'm still standing here. Serena looked at Priya. He held up 4 fingers. 4 minutes left on the transmission. She stepped out from under the overpass into the road. Silas looked at her. Something moved in his face. Not surprise, he'd practiced away surprise long ago. Something more like recognition. The acknowledgement of something he'd underestimated. You were always the variable I couldn't fully account for, he said. The Vescari men I know. Their patterns, their loyalties, their breaking points. But you, he tilted his head slightly. You weren't supposed to be anything except the vehicle. The incubator. The means to an end. I know, she said. That was your mistake. Was it? He reached into his coat pocket and produced a phone. On its screen, visible even at this distance, a video feed, a room, a chair, a woman she didn't know with her hands bound. Helena Marsh, who was standing behind Serena, made a sharp involuntary sound. Helena's sister, Silas said. In Portland. She's been there since 8 o'clock this evening, waiting for me to decide I need her. He looked at Serena. The drive, the chip, and you walk away. All of you. 3 minutes, maybe less. Serena looked at the phone, looked at Helena, looked at Damien, who was looking at her with an expression that said, Your call. Not because he was abdicating, because he understood that this was hers to decide, and he was going to stand behind whatever she decided. She looked at Silas. You built a financial empire on encrypted access codes hidden inside a child, she said. You engineered a massacre so a young woman would run scared and give birth somewhere you could access. You spent 12 years treating a human being as a storage device. She kept her voice level, flat. The way she delivered bad news in the clinic, without drama, because drama is for people who need the moment to be about them, and she had stopped needing that. And you're standing in a road in Oregon at 4 a.m, making threats about a woman in a chair in Portland, because that is all you have left. Silas was quiet. You don't have leverage, she said. You have a phone with a video feed, and you have maybe 2 minutes before everything you built for 15 years starts transmitting to people who have been waiting to receive it. She took 1 step toward him, her ankle held. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to call the people in Portland and tell them to let that woman go. And then you're going to decide what to do with the next 2 minutes, because after that, the decision gets made for you. The silence on the road had weight. Behind her, she heard Priya say, very quietly, 1 minute. Silas looked at the phone in his hand, looked at Serena, looked past her at Damien, and in his face was the specific expression of a man who has spent a lifetime believing he had accounted for every variable and is standing in the exact moment where that belief has been disproved. His hand moved toward the phone. And that was when the shot came. Not from Silas's vehicles, not from the ridge, from somewhere on the overpass structure above them, and it took the phone out of Silas's hand with a precision that was either extraordinary marksmanship or extraordinary luck, and Serena was grabbing for Rowan before she'd finished processing which one it was. Silas moved, his people moved, Damien moved, and Priya said with the specific calm of someone announcing a bus departure, "Transmitting." The next 60 seconds were the kind that compress in memory into a series of images without connective tissue. Damien crossing the distance to Silas with a speed that didn't fit with how carefully he usually moved. Marcus coming up from the left flank. Silas's people realizing simultaneously that the perimeter they'd built was inverted. They were the ones contained. Rowan flat against the concrete abutment exactly where Serena had put him, not moving, not making a sound, watching everything with those eyes. Silas and Damien in the road. No weapons. Just two men and 20 years of accumulated damage between them, and Damien with the specific advantage of someone who has nothing left to protect except the thing that's right behind him. Silas was fast for his age. He was experienced. He had spent his entire life understanding that physical confrontation was a last resort, and had therefore ensured he was competent at it when it arrived. Damien was faster, and he was not fighting like a man defending an empire. He was fighting like a father. The distinction was total. Silas went down on the third exchange. Not a clean fall, a hard one, the kind that takes the breath and the resistance simultaneously. Damien had his arm and his weight, and it was over before Serena had fully registered it starting, and Damien was breathing hard with his knee on the road, and Silas beneath him, and the pre-dawn silence of coastal Oregon pressing in on all sides. "It's done," Priya said. "Full transmission, all 6 repositories, all 4 outlets. It's out." Nobody moved for a moment. Then Serena walked out from under the overpass and into the road and stood over Silas Viscari, who was on his back in the road looking up at the underside of the overpass and the dark sky beyond it, with the expression of a man who has arrived at the end of a very long calculation and found the answer was wrong. She looked at him for a long moment. "My son's name is Rowan," she said. "He's 11 years old. He took apart every broken thing in our house because he wanted to understand how things worked. He saved a stranger's life on a highway because it was the right thing to do. He sat through a surgery tonight without making a sound." She crouched down so he could see her face clearly. "He is not a device. He is not a means to an end. He is a person. And you will spend whatever time you have left knowing that every single thing you built to take him is gone, and he is still here, and you are on your back in a road." She stood up. Behind her, Rowan had come out from the abutment. He was standing at the edge of the overpass, watching. When she turned and walked back toward him, he didn't say anything. He just looked at her with those eyes, and then, slowly, he reached out and took her hand. She held it. Damien was still in the road, breathing through the aftermath of what he'd just done, and he looked up at the two of them standing there, Serena and Rowan, hand in hand at the edge of the overpass, in the first gray suggestion of a dawn that was still 40 minutes away, and something in his face did the thing it had done at the motel when he first saw Rowan. The shattering that was also a recognition, only this time he didn't look away from it. Somewhere in the distance, a siren, faint, growing, the kind of sound that means someone has already made the calls that needed to be made, that the machinery of consequence is now in motion and cannot be stopped any more than the transmission Priya had just sent could be recalled from the 6 servers currently receiving it. Serena looked at Damien in the road. "It's over," she said. He looked at her. "Is it?" She thought about everything behind them, the 12 years, the basement, the rain, the flight to Portland, the loose floorboard, the envelope checked every 6 months, the careful small life built over a fault line that had finally, tonight, had broken open along every seam, and she thought about everything ahead of them, which was uncertain and complicated and nothing close to clean. "The worst parts are over," she said. "That's enough for right now." The sirens grew closer. Damien got up from the road. He walked to where they were standing, and he stopped 3 feet away, close enough to matter, far enough to ask permission, and Rowan looked up at him with those shared eyes and said simply, "Okay." It was enough. It was, for this moment, exactly enough. The sirens arrived before the dawn did. 3 county vehicles and a black federal SUV that had no markings and didn't need any. They came in from the south road with their lights going and pulled up at the overpass in a formation that suggested someone had been briefed in advance. Not scrambled in response, but positioned, waiting for the moment to arrive. Damien had made calls Serena didn't know about. She understood this when she saw the federal vehicle, and she filed it under the long list of things she was going to need a full accounting of when the immediate crisis stopped requiring all available oxygen. The agent who got out of the black SUV was a woman, mid-40s, with the particular economy of movement that comes from spending years in rooms where every gesture is read. She looked at Silas on the ground, at Marcus with the blood on his sleeve, at Priya with his laptop still open on the car hood, at Damien standing in the road, and finally at Serena and Rowan standing at the edge of the overpass. She walked to Damien first. "It transmitted?" she said. "6 repositories," Damien said, "for 4 outlets. Priya can give you the confirmation timestamps. We're already receiving it." She looked at Silas. "He'll be in federal custody within the hour. The Portland situation has been resolved. Our people reached the location 12 minutes ago." Helena Marsh, who had been standing very still against the abutment wall, let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for several hours. The agent looked at Serena. "Ms. Vale? Or is it Moran?" "It's Vale," Serena said. It was the first time she'd said it out loud in 12 years. It came out steadier than she expected. "We'll need a full statement. Not tonight. You need medical attention, and your son needs to be somewhere that isn't a road." She paused. "But soon." "I know," Serena said. The agent nodded once and went back to her vehicle and began making calls, and the efficient machinery of federal consequence began processing the scene around them with the impersonal thoroughness of something that had been waiting for exactly this evidence package and knew precisely what to do with it. Serena sat down on the road. Not a collapse. A decision. Her ankle had been a sustained argument for the past several hours, and she had been consistently overruling it, and she was done overruling it. She sat on the asphalt at the edge of the overpass with her leg extended and her back against the concrete, and she looked at the sky, which was beginning, very faintly, to differentiate itself from the darkness. Rowan sat down beside her. They didn't say anything. There wasn't anything that needed saying right at that moment. The sirens had cut out, and the voices of federal agents and county officers filled the space around them with the particular administrative language of aftermath. And Serena listened to it with the specific relief of someone who has been the only competent person in a room for too long and has just been permitted to stop. Damien came and crouched in front of them. He looked at Serena's ankle, looked at her face, looked at Rowan. "There's a hospital 20 minutes from here," he said. "I know," she said. "I've referred patients to it. The agent will arrange transport." "I know that too." He stayed crouched there, not filling the silence, just present in it, which was something she hadn't expected from him, and was going to have to think about at a later date when she had the capacity to think about anything that wasn't immediate and operational. "The agent," she said. "You set this up in advance." "When I confirmed Silas was moving on your location, I contacted the federal task force that's been building a case against his financial network for 3 years. The transmission was the piece they needed. I agreed to deliver it in exchange for—" He stopped. "For what?" "For immunity agreements covering certain organizational activities," he said. "For myself and for the people who came with me tonight." She looked at him. "And for yourself specifically?" "I'm not immune from everything," he said. "There will be proceedings. There are things I did that have consequences I'm not trying to avoid." "But you'll be free." "Eventually," he said. "Yes." She held his gaze and thought about the version of this conversation she might have had with him 12 years ago, if 12 years ago had gone differently, if she had not taken a wrong turn through a wine cellar, if she had found him before dinner and finished the argument properly, if the ordinary friction of 2 people trying to build a future together had been allowed to continue being ordinary. She thought about all of that, and then she let it go. Not because it didn't matter, but because it was a weight she had been carrying in addition to everything else. And she was choosing, right now, at the edge of this overpass in the first gray light of a coastal Oregon morning, to set it down. "Okay," she said. Okay. I'm not forgiving everything tonight, she said. I want to be clear about that. There's a lot I need to understand and a lot that's going to take time, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I'm not asking you to. But okay, she said. We'll figure out what okay looks like. The three of us. Rowan, who had been listening to all of this with the patient attention he brought to everything that mattered, looked at Damien. Do you know how to cook anything? Damien blinked. What? Cook? Food? Can you do it? A pause. I can make eggs. That's a start, Rowan said, as if this settled something. He leaned his head back against the concrete and closed his eyes. Damien looked at Serena. She looked back at him, and for the first time in 12 years, something in her face did not need to be managed or controlled or deliberately composed. It was just her face, in the early morning, exhausted and damaged, and more relieved than she knew how to express. Eggs, she said. Apparently, he said. The hospital in the next town kept her for 6 hours. The ankle was a severe sprain with minor ligament damage, no surgery, but a boot and genuine rest, and the kind of physical therapy timeline that her clinic colleagues were going to enjoy telling her she was handling wrong. She had 2 cracked ribs she hadn't known about, which explained certain things about the last few hours. The cut on her palm needed 4 stitches. She was dehydrated and her blood pressure was running high, and the attending physician, a calm man named Dr. Reyes, who had clearly decided not to ask any questions beyond the clinically necessary ones, told her she was going to feel substantially worse tomorrow when the adrenaline fully metabolized. I know, she said. I'm a doctor. Then you know I'm right, he said, and left her to it. Rowan was checked and cleared. The surgical site was clean, the closure holding, no signs of infection. He sat in the hospital bed in the pediatric bay, eating crackers from a vending machine bag and watching the news on the wall-mounted television with the quiet attention of someone who understands they are watching the consequences of a night they were part of. The financial story broke at 6:42 in the morning. By 7:15, it was the lead item on 3 national outlets. By 9, it was everywhere. The scale of the network, the 15 years of hidden movement, the shell company architecture unraveling in public view as federal agencies on 2 continents began the work of tracing accounts and freezing assets and building the legal framework for what prosecutors were already calling one of the most complex financial crimes cases of the decade. Silas Vescari's name appeared in the 8th paragraph of the first major story. By the afternoon editions, it was in the headline. Serena watched this from the hospital bed with her booted ankle elevated and a cup of terrible coffee going cold on the tray beside her, and felt something she didn't immediately have a name for. Not satisfaction. Satisfaction implied the outcome had been worth the cost, and she wasn't ready to make that calculation yet. Something quieter. The specific sensation of a thing that has been in motion for a very long time finally coming to rest. Helena Marsh came to the hospital at noon. She was smaller in daylight than she had seemed in the dark under the overpass. A compact woman with gray-streaked hair pulled back and the kind of careful posture that speaks of someone who has spent years making herself take up less space. She stood in the doorway of Serena's room and looked at her and said, I've been wanting to meet you for about 3 years. Sit down, Serena said. She sat. She looked at her hands for a moment. I started keeping records in 2019. When I understood fully what I was managing, not just the numbers, but what the numbers represented, where they came from. She paused. I told myself I was building a case, that I was waiting for the right moment. The truth is I was scared, and the records were a way of feeling like I was doing something without actually doing anything. What changed? Your son saved Edmund Hale's life on a highway, Helena said, and I watched what happened next. Watched Silas start moving his people west, and I understood that the moment I'd been waiting for was going to happen whether or not I was ready for it, and I had to decide whether I was going to be part of it or not. She looked at Serena. I'm sorry it took me as long as it did. Serena looked at this woman who had spent 3 years being afraid and had finally, in the right moment, done the thing that mattered. You sent the text, Serena said, at the motel. That bought us time. It was 4 words. 4 words at the right moment, Serena said, is more than most people manage. Helena looked at her hands again. Then she nodded once, the nod of someone receiving something they hadn't known they needed, and stood up. "I have about 40 hours of federal interviews ahead of me," she said. "So do I," Serena said. "Maybe we'll run into each other." "Maybe," Serena said. And then, "Helena, thank you." The older woman paused in the doorway. Something in her face shifted. Not dramatically, just the small visible relaxation of something that had been held tightly for a long time and has been permitted finally to loosen. She left without another word, which was exactly right. The federal interviews took 4 days. They were conducted in a field office in Portland. Not uncomfortable, not hostile, just long and specific in the way that legal documentation is long and specific. The patient assembly of a complete record. Serena answered every question fully. She withheld nothing. She understood that the completeness of her account was part of what made the case structurally sound, and she was not interested in the case being anything other than structurally sound. On the second day, a prosecutor named Aldridge showed her a photograph. "Do you recognize this individual?" It was the specialist who had placed Rowan's cardiac chip. Serena looked at the photograph for a long time. "Yes," she said. "He was employed by Harmon Pediatric Associates from 2012 to 2016. We have documentation indicating he received payment from a shell company connected to Silas Vescari's network for the procedure performed on your son in March 2013. Serena looked at the photograph and thought about a clinic waiting room and a recommendation she'd accepted without question because she had been 25 and alone and trying so hard to do everything right. "He followed instructions," she said, "for money." "That appears to be correct." "Is he cooperating?" "Extensively," Aldridge said. She put the photograph down. "Good." On the 4th day, Aldridge told her that Silas Vescari had entered a not guilty plea, which surprised no one, and that the financial evidence was of sufficient quality that the plea was, in his word, optimistic. He told her the case would take time to fully prosecute, possibly 2 years, possibly more. He told her she would likely be called to testify. "I'll be there," she said. She meant it without drama, without performance. She would be there because she had stopped running, and she intended to stay stopped. Damien's legal situation was, as he had said, complicated. The immunity agreement covered the actions of that specific night and the cooperation that had led to the transmission. It did not cover the prior 12 years of operating a criminal organization, which he had known when he signed it. There were proceedings. There was a period of several months during which his situation was unresolved, and Serena knew better than to build anything on unresolved ground. She did not stop speaking to him during this period. She also did not pretend it was uncomplicated. They talked on the phone, sometimes briefly, sometimes longer. The conversations were not romantic. They were two people who shared a child and a history and were trying to figure out, from a distance and with no template to work from, what that meant going forward. Some conversations were hard. One, in the 3rd month, was genuinely terrible. She said things she'd been carrying for 12 years and hadn't released with the care she intended, and he received them without defense, which somehow made it harder rather than easier. She called him back 3 days later. "I wasn't entirely fair," she said. "You were entirely honest," he said. "That's not the same thing, but it's more useful." She sat with that for a moment. "How are the proceedings?" "Moving," he said. "Slowly. The way these things move." "Are you going to be okay?" A pause. "I'm going to be accountable," he said. Which is different from okay, but feels more honest than okay. She understood this. She had spent 12 years building a version of okay that was really just the absence of catastrophe, and she knew the difference between that and something that was genuinely, structurally sound. "Rowan wants to video call on Sunday," she said. "If you're available." "I'm available," Damien said. There was something in his voice when he said it, not sentiment, something underneath sentiment, more durable than that. "I'll be available." The medical center opened in April. Not a grand opening. She had neither the budget nor the temperament for grand openings. A Tuesday morning, the door unlocked at 8, the waiting room filling with the particular mix of people a coastal community produces. Fishermen with repetitive stress injuries, elderly residents managing chronic conditions, young families who'd been driving 40 minutes each way for routine care. By noon, she had seen 11 patients. By 3 o'clock, she understood she was going to need a second physician within 6 months and began drafting the job listing in her head during the walk home. It was the first time she had walked home from work without checking over her shoulder in 12 years. She noticed it halfway down the block and stopped. Just stood there on the sidewalk in the April afternoon with the Pacific wind doing its constant indifferent thing and the smell of salt coming off the water 2 streets over and the ordinary sounds of a town moving through an ordinary Tuesday. She stood there for a long time. Then she kept walking. Rowan's first in-person meeting with Damien happened on a Saturday in May, 6 months after the overpass. Serena had offered to arrange it, to structure it, to be present for whatever degree of presence was useful. Rowan had listened to all of her offers and then said, "I think I want to do it at the beach. Just us two first. You can be nearby." "Nearby meaning what?" "The bench by the parking lot," he said. "I'll be able to see you from there." She sat on the bench by the parking lot and watched her son and his father stand at the edge of the water 50 yards away. She couldn't hear what they said. She watched Rowan gesture at something in the water, a wave pattern, a bird, some piece of observable data that interested him. She watched Damien look at whatever Rowan was pointing at and then look back at the boy and nod. They stood there for 40 minutes. At one point, Rowan said something that made Damien go very still, and then Damien sat down on the sand, which surprised her because it was cold and damp, and a man in the kind of coat Damien was wearing did not typically sit on cold, damp sand, and Rowan sat beside him, and they sat there together looking at the water. She didn't try to read it from a distance. It wasn't hers to read. When they came back up the beach toward the parking lot, Rowan was a half step ahead, which she recognized as the position he took when he was processing something significant and needed the slight lead to do it. Damien walked behind him with his hands in his coat pockets and his eyes on the sand in front of his feet. "Okay?" she said to Rowan. "Yeah," he said. "Good." He went to the car and got in, leaving the door open, which meant he was giving them a minute. Serena looked at Damien. He looked at her. The afternoon light was doing something specific to the water behind him, and to the general fact of his presence here in Kettridge Bay, in May, alive and standing on a beach in the ordinary world like a person who was allowed to be in it. "He told me about the hawk," Damien said. "The one he saw the day of the accident. He said he thinks about it sometimes, what things look like from up there." "He's mentioned it before," she said. "He said he thinks you do that," Damien said. "Hold the whole picture in your head at once, that it's one of the things that makes you good at what you do." She looked at him. "He said that?" "Approximately," Damien said. The exact phrasing was something like, "She sees everything at the same time," which is annoying when you're trying to get away with something, but actually pretty useful in a crisis. She looked at the car, where Rowan was visible through the window doing something on his phone with the absolute absorption of an 11-year-old who has said what he intended to say and has now moved on. "He's not wrong," she said. "No," Damien said. "He's usually not." She looked at Damien for a long moment. There was a version of this moment that was a beginning, something new, something deliberately constructed from the wreckage of what had come before. She wasn't ready for that version yet. She suspected she wouldn't be ready for it for some time, and she had spent enough of her life managing the distance between what she was ready for and what she needed that she had some skill at being patient with herself about it. But there was also something true in this moment that she was willing to acknowledge. Here, on a beach parking lot in May, with the Pacific doing its patient, constant work in the background. "He's going to want to know everything," she said, "about where you came from, what you were like when you were his age. Everything I never told him, because I didn't think it was safe to tell him." "I'll tell him whatever he wants to know," Damien said. "Including the parts that aren't good?" "Especially those," he said. "He deserves accurate information." She nodded once, looked at the water, looked back. "Sunday dinners," she said, "if you're available. When you're in town. Nothing formal, just dinner. The 3 of us. We figure out the rest as we go." Damien was quiet for a moment. In his face was something she recognized from the overpass and from the hospital doorway and from the road outside the harbor view at 4 in the morning. The expression of a man who has been prepared for difficulty and has been presented instead with something ordinary, and doesn't yet trust the ordinariness enough to fully receive it. Yes, he said. Sunday dinners. Good, she said. I'll cook. You bring eggs. She walked to the car without looking back because she had spent 12 years looking back and she was practicing the other direction. The autumn came the way it always came to Kettridge Bay, sideways, salt first, the light changing from summer's direct angle to something lower and more considered. The town went about its business. The clinic filled and emptied and filled again. Rowan started 7th grade and came home one afternoon with a permission slip for a marine biology elective that he presented to Serena with the energy of someone who has already decided yes and is performing the formality of asking. She signed it. She was sitting on the clinic's back steps one afternoon in October, eating lunch in the 20 minutes she had between appointments, when her phone showed a text from Damien, a photograph, no caption. It was a wildflower, a single stem, purple-headed, the kind that grew in the scrub along the coastal ridge. He had taken it from ground level, the flower filling most of the frame, the Pacific visible as a thin gray line in the background. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she typed back, Sunday, 6 o'clock. Don't be late. His reply was immediate, a single word, never. She put the phone in her pocket and finished her lunch and went back inside to see her next patient, and the Pacific kept doing what the Pacific does. Indifferent to all of it, patient, enormous, moving in and out against the rocks at the town's western edge, with the same rhythm it had maintained before any of them arrived, and would maintain long after all of them were gone. But that afternoon, in the specific light of a specific October in Kettridge Bay, Oregon, a woman sat in her clinic and a boy came home from school, and a man drove north on the coastal highway with wildflowers on the passenger seat, and the 12 years of running that had taken so much from all of them had finally, fully, irrevocably stopped. What remained was not perfect. It was not clean. It was 3 people with damage and history and the kind of complicated love that doesn't resolve into something simple just because the crisis is over. But it was theirs. And for the first time in a very long time, that was enough.